For today is, yesterday I burned 3,000 calories. That's the last time I leave brownies in the oven while I take a nap. I like the story of the priest who was walking down the street in New York City, and he felt somebody come up behind him, and somebody stuck a gun in his back and says, "Give me your wallet, hand over your money." So the priest very carefully turned around and reached for his wallet. And then the robber realized it was a Catholic priest. He said, "Oh, Father, I could not, steal from you. I'm not going to take your money." Well, the priest was greatly relieved, but he was badly shaken. And so he pulled out a pack of cigarettes to have a cigarette to calm his nerves, and even offered one to the robber. He says, "Would you like one?" And the robber said, "No, thanks, Father. I gave up smoking for Lent." That's one of the things the Lord talks about in today's gospel. He says, there are people that disregard God's commandments and yet cling to human traditions. That's one of the points in the gospel. As you know, the last 5 weeks we've gone through John chapter 6, all about the Eucharist and the bread of life discourse. But now we're back into St. Mark's gospel during this year, and we're up to chapter 7 of St. Mark. And what happens in the gospel is that the scribes and the Pharisees criticize the Lord and his disciples for not following all the traditions of the elders. What were the traditions of the elders? Well, the scribes and Pharisees had read through the entire, what we call the Old Testament, the Torah, the writings, the law, and they picked out 613 rules and regulations that they as Pharisees followed. And the word Pharisee means the separated ones, because they separated themselves from the rest, because they felt that if they fulfilled and did all of these rules and regulations, they would be righteous in the eyes of God. They would be pure and holy in God's eyes. They would be, holy. And so they did these 613 rules and regulations. Some of them were ceremonial hand washings. Some of them were dietary laws. Others were other kinds of rituals that they went through. Out of these 613, 365 were prohibitions, things you weren't allowed to do. 248 were suggestions of what you should do, like feeding the poor and helping others. So our Lord is criticized, and his disciples are criticized for not keeping these really man-made human traditions. And how does the Lord respond? Well, he says, don't give God lip service. He says, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. See, the mistake of the scribes and Pharisees was they thought that holiness was external, just doing these external requirements of these laws. Whereas Jesus says, holiness is internal. It's loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, loving your neighbor as yourself, following his 10 commandments. Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. So holiness really is internal. It's your life of prayer, your interior life of prayer and sacrifice and love of God and love of others. And so that's what the Lord talks about in the gospel. And then he comes up with this very important point that, again, it's not the food that you take into your body that makes you righteous or pure in God's eyes. It's what comes out of the mind and heart that makes a person pure, holy, and righteous. And he says that nothing that enters from outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile. From within people, from their hearts. Notice it comes from their mind and hearts, come evil thoughts. And he gives a litany of sins like unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, and folly. It says all these things come from within, and they defile the person. Not the external ceremonial hand washings and things like that, but what comes from the heart. When people go to confession or go to spiritual direction, one of the things is try to get to the root of their sins. And, for example, all sins begin first with a thought. Somebody just doesn't rob a bank. First they think about robbing a bank, and then they sit down and make their plans and their plots and get other people involved, and then they rob a bank. But it first began with their thought. All sin really begins with the thought. For example, a person could have a thought of pride or anger or lust or envy or jealousy. And those are temptations when they come into a person's mind. It's what you do with it that if you reject it right away and say, I do not consent to that thought, and reject that thought, then that thought will not grow into words or actions. When we think of like a Mother Teresa, in her heart and mind she had a desire to serve the poor. That was in her heart and her mind. Well, that grew into a worldwide movement of taking care of the poor. So again, our thoughts come into reality. I think, think of the great works of architecture we have in our world. You think of the Great Wall of China. First began with somebody's thought to build the Great Wall of China. The Taj Mahal, the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, all of those things did not exist at one time, and yet it got into somebody's mind, in their heart and in their thought to build those incredible structures, and it took reality. It came into reality. I think of this beautiful church. At one time this was a field with some trees, and yet in the thoughts of Father Barquette and others, let's build a beautiful church to give honor and glory to God, to serve our parishioners. And so that thought then was given to an architect who took those thoughts, put them onto paper, drew up the plans, then gave them to a contractor and construction workers, and we have a beautiful church that came into reality because of thought. And this is mentioned many times throughout the Bible, throughout history, the power of one's thought, because it really is the only thing we can control. You can't control the weather, you can't control external circumstances, but you can control your thoughts. For example, there's a saying, you can't control the wind, but you can set the sail. You can't control the wind, but you can set the sail. So our thoughts, again, if you want to live a good and holy life, have good and holy thoughts. If you get a bad thought, get rid of it right away. Just like in a garden, you can plant a seed and it'll grow. It's very easy to uproot that little plant when it's small. Just like if you get a bad thought, uproot it when it's small. Don't let it grow into something larger and bigger that you'll have to use a shovel to get out. Or it could grow into like a big oak tree, and then you need a chainsaw to cut it down. So again, virtue and holiness begins with the thought. This is mentioned in the Bible where it says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Marcus Aurelius, one of the early philosophers, said, a man's life is what his thoughts make of it. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, a man is what he thinks about all day long. So I really love what Emerson also wrote. He said, when you sow a thought, you reap an action. When you sow an action, you reap a habit. When you sow a habit, you reap a character. When you sow a character, you reap a destiny. So again, our mind is like a garden, and if we want to grow in holiness, plant good, virtuous, holy thoughts in your mind, and then they will grow into good, holy actions and good habits to determine our character, which will eventually determine our destiny, either in heaven or in hell. Some of the books I would recommend about, again, what the Lord is talking about today, the importance of what comes from our mind and hearts and from our thoughts. Father Faber, the great Catholic priest from England who converted to the Catholic faith at the time of St. John Henry Newman, has a wonderful book called Spiritual Conferences. And in that book he talks about kind thoughts, kind words, kind actions, and then many other topics. A book that I read in high school and college, this was in 1903, was written by a man named James Allen. It's called As a Man Thinketh. Again, 1903, James Allen. It's a real classic based upon this principle of as we sow, so shall you reap. What you sow into your mind, what you allow to be cultivated in your mind, either for good, for virtue and holiness, or for evil. And then another book that I've read many times, written by a wonderful Protestant minister, a man of virtue and holiness, Norman Vincent Peale. Many of you have read The Power of Positive Thinking. Again, the same idea. The book is filled with scripture quotations and good Christian values of the importance of keeping your thoughts good and holy. Another book that I've read about a dozen times is Napoleon Hill's classic, Think and Grow Rich. You can take those principles and turn them into think and grow holy, right? Think and grow holy. It's the same principle. Take those principles and apply them to your spiritual life. And of course, one of the best recordings is the 1956 classic called The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. I've probably listened to it over 100 times in my life. I highly recommend it. It's 35 minutes. Just go online, type in The Strangest Secret, Earl Nightingale, and you can hear him giving this 35-minute talk all about this same principle, that we become what we think about. The saints thought about loving God. They thought about loving others, serving the poor. The saints thought about good and holy things, and that because they sowed those thoughts, they put them into action, into good habits, into virtue, character, and they became great saints. Others, sadly, give in to thoughts of pride, lust, greed, envy, jealousy, and sadly it leads them down the wrong path. So I encourage you to look into those really classic writings and see the Christian principles, the biblical principle that lies within those writings. And really, I guess you can summarize it with that little saying that says, our mind is a garden, our thoughts are the seeds. You can grow flowers or you can grow weeds.